This segment is the third segment of Module 5A. It focuses on the second step of the SLO development process: determine the interval of instruction and identify content. If you have not completed segments 1 and 2 yet, please exit this presentation now and complete those segments first.
At this point, you have completed Step 1 of the SLO development process. Let's turn now to Step 2, determine the interval of instruction and identify content. The interval of instruction should match the length of the course. Remember that all SLO scores must be entered into the Electronic Teacher and Principal Evaluation System, or ETPES, by May 10th. So for example, if a course is year-long, the interval of instruction might be from September 15th to April 15th to meet the Ohio Revised Code May 1st timeline for teacher evaluation. This time frame will leave the teacher with 2 weeks to administer the post-assessment, complete the SLO scoring template, organize the data and evidence, and meet with the evaluator to discuss scoring. You might include different dates as long as the interval of instruction matches the course, aligns with the district evaluation timelines, and ends prior to May 1st. From handout 5A.3, we know that Mrs. Wilson's course is year-long. Given this information, articulate an appropriate interval of instruction for your SLO. Look at the Slo Template Checklist to ensure you meet the criterion for this component. Even though it is not required, you also may consider adding additional information in this section if there are factors that could impact student growth. For instance, knowing that the class meets daily and how long the typical class period lasts could be beneficial for the committee. You may pause this recording while you complete this section of the SLO and then click play when you are finished. Mrs. Wilson met the requirements for the interval of instruction component by articulating beginning and ending dates of the SLO. Note that even though the course is year-long, Mrs. Wilson set the end date for mid-April in order to leave sufficient time to administer the post-assessment, score them, and meet with the evaluator to rate the SLO. You might have included different dates, as long as the interval of instruction matches the course, aligns with the district evaluation timelines, and ends prior to May 1st. Other information to include in this section might be class length and the frequency of the class. In this second part of Step 2, teachers will need to identify the content of the SLO. As a reminder, the content of the SLO should be aligned to the highest ranking of the course standards that apply to the teacher's course. For example, if the Common Core State Standards does not apply to a teacher's course, he or she will need to use the Ohio Learning Standards if those apply to the course. If neither Common Core State Standards nor Ohio Standards apply to the course, the teacher should use national standards put forth by education organizations. In this case, Mrs. Wilson is a middle school science teacher, so she will be using the Common Core State Standards for grades 6 through 8, literacy and science and technical subjects in conjunction with the Ohio Learning Standards for grade 7 science. These standards are contained in handouts 5A.8 and 5A.9. The next step in this process is to review the standards and determine those that are the most important. By most important, we mean the standards that represent essential learning or enduring skills that students will need to master to be successful in later courses. These are the big ideas and skills emphasized in the course, often referred to as the power or umbrella standards. For some, selecting the most important standards will be challenging, which is why ODE highly encourages that teachers discuss their course standards with colleagues, such as in a professional learning committee, grade level team, or department team. In addition, if teachers determine the most important standards as a group, this can increase comparability across teachers because SLOs will target the same or similar standards. We are often asked how many standards teachers should include in an SLO. This number will vary by course and subject area, so again, deciding as a group the most important standards can be very helpful. At this point, please pause the recording and review the standards included in handouts 5A.8 and 5A.9. Identify the most important standards that the SLO will cover. Stop the recording and return to this module when you are ready to proceed. At this point, you should have reviewed and determined which standards the SLO will target. Again, it is encouraged that teachers collaborate with colleagues to determine which standards the SLO will target. If all teachers in the same subject or grade target the same or similar standards, SLOs will be more comparable across teachers. Because you are creating a class or course level SLO, you can now complete the standards and content component of the SLO template. If you were creating a targeted SLO, you would want to further break down the standards to find those where a specific subgroup of students most needs assistance or possible enrichment. In this component, you will need to do 4 things. Specify which standards Mrs. Wilson's SLO will cover. You can list them. Summarize the information contained in the standards. Because reviewers may not be familiar with the standards, it is important to summarize the information contained within the standards. In addition, this summary also gives you the opportunity to demonstrate in-depth understanding of the standards that apply to the course or subject. Explain how these standards represent the big ideas of the course. And explain why the selected standards are important. In other words, why do these standards matter? Why is it important that students leave this course knowing this information or skill? Now please return to your SLO template and get ready to complete the standards and content component. When writing this part of the SLO, please look at the SLO Template Checklist to ensure you meet the criteria for this component. Note that the third bullet applies only to targeted SLOs and thus does not need to be addressed in this SLO. It helps the review committee know whether the SLO is comprehensive or targeted by stating whether the SLO is targeted or not. Please pause now and complete the standards and content component for Mrs. Wilson. Press play when you are ready to resume. This slide features an excerpt of what Mrs. Wilson wrote for this section. Remember that the SLO must be aligned to the highest ranking of the state standards listed on the SLO Template Checklist. In this case, the SLO must align to the Common Core state standards in grades 6 through 8, literacy and science and technical subjects, and the Ohio Learning Standards for Science. Note that Mrs. Wilson selected the standards that the district identified for her as most important. In most cases, teachers may have to analyze content standards themselves and decide on their own which standards are most important. When analyzing content standards, it is preferable that teachers do so as a grade level or subject level team so that teachers develop a shared understanding of which content is most important. Since Mrs. Wilson is the only 7th grade science teacher, she should collaborate with the science department and/or curriculum director when choosing her standards and content. SLOs will be more comparable if teachers target similar or the same content standards. Although not shown here, Mrs. Wilson also describes in her SLOs how this SLO aligns with the Ohio Learning Standards for Science. In this section of the SLO, she identifies which standards the SLO will target and summarizes the content. She does not identify specific Ohio academic content standards because the document from Ohio does not list standards, but she at least summarizes the key ideas of the standards.
This concludes segment 3. The next segment will focus on the third step of the SLO development process, choose assessments and set the growth target. When you're ready to proceed with Module 5A, please open segment 4.